ហើយឥឡូវនេះយើងមានការចាប់ផ្ដើមនៃការប្រជុំពេញអង្គទី1ដែលមានខ្ញុំបាទអង្គគលអនុប្រធានជាស្ថានតំណែងអន្តរជាតិនៃប្រទេសសភាកម្ពុជាជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលនៅក្នុងកិច្ចពិភាក្សាពេញអង្គលើកទី1នេះហើយយើងមានប្រធាន5រូបទី1យើងមានលោកបណ្ឌិតឈុតបន្ថងអនុប្រធានវិទ្យាស្ថានតំណែងអន្តរជាតិនៃកម្ពុជាទី2យើងមានលោកបណ្ឌិតដានញ៉ែលសុខឹងលោកជាប្រធានខណ្ឌរាជកាដូនេអាល់ប្រចាំនៅកម្ពុជាទី3យើងមានវាគ្មិនលោកបណ្ឌិតឆេងកំឡុងអនុប្រធានវិទ្យាស្ថានចក្ខុវិស័យអាស៊ីប្រចាំនៅកម្ពុជានិងលោកបណ្ឌិតតាត់ជ្រីតាក់ទុនអង្គពីទៀតប្រធានមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលអាស៊ីថ្មីប្រកបដោយបរិយាបន្នអតីតរដ្ឋមន្ត្រីក្រសួងគមនាគមន៍សហព័ន្ធនិងជាអតីតអនុប្រធានសភា
បាទជាខំសូមថ្លែងអរគុណចំពោះលោកបណ្ឌិតកម្មធុលបាទជាអ្នកសម្របសម្រួលបាទសូមគោរពគណៈវាគ្មិនដែលអំលោកជំទាវលោកស្រីទាំងអស់ដែលមានវត្តមានទីនេះជាជាតិនិងអន្តរជាតិទាំងអស់ជាទីគោរពអានខ្ញុំបាទឈុតបន្ថងមកពីវិទ្យាស្ថានតំណែងអន្តរជាតិនៃកម្ពុជានៃរាជបណ្ឌិតសភាកម្ពុជាហើយខ្ញុំមានបទបង្ហាញមួយដែលមានចំណងជើងថាជាទូនាទីនៃធនាគារខួរក្បាលនៅក្នុងការរួមចំណែកផ្នែកបញ្ហានៅក្នុងប្រធានបទនេះមែនទែនមិនបានវិភាគសាស៊ីជម្រៅអីខ្លាំងពេកទេប៉ុន្តែគាត់តែបង្ហាញថាតើធនាគារខួរក្បាលហ្នឹងរួមចំណែកស្អីខ្លះនៅក្នុងការដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាជារួមមិនរំអិតចូលនៅក្នុងប្រធានបទជាក់លាក់ណាមួយនៅឡើយទេហើយដោយសារតែលើកដំបូងលើកទី1បរិមលើកទី1នេះគឺជាការដែលយើងចង់ឲ្យស៊ីងថែងទាំងអស់មកជុំគ្នាដើម្បីយល់គ្នាហើយនឹងធ្វើការជាមួយគ្នាអញ្ចឹងជាបទរបស់ខ្ញុំមិនទាន់ specific ទៅលើបញ្ហាជាក់លាក់ណាមួយនៅឡើយទេបាទហើយនៅក្នុងបទបង្ហាញនេះដែរខ្ញុំអនុញ្ញាតជម្រាបជូននៅវេទិកាជាមួយយើងផ្ដើមសេចក្តីតិចទៅហើយជាបង្ហាញប្រភេទស៊ីងថែងអញ្ចឹងមានអីខ្លះហើយទូនាទីគាត់ធ្វើអីគាត់មានបញ្ហាប្រឈមអីខ្លះហើយយើងដោះស្រាយយ៉ាងម៉េចខ្លះទៅលើបញ្ហាប្រឈមដែលមានហ្នឹងហើយចុងក្រោយក៏សន្និដ្ឋានទី3ម៉ាត់បាទយើងទាំងអស់គ្នាបានដឹងថាមិននេះជាជជែកស៊ីងថែងហើយដំឈីកំឡុងលោកឈីកំឡុងក៏បានលើកថាមកសំទោសលោកយ៉ាងណាជាកំឡុងដែលគាត់និយាយរឿងការបកប្រែស៊ីងថែងពីខ្មែរទៅអង់គ្លេសទៅខ្មែរទៅបកទៅវាទៅជានៃអីផ្សេងទៅបាទចឹងខ្ញុំកន្លងមកយើងឃើញថាពាក្យហ្នឹងយើងบอกថាធនាគារខួរក្បាលវាជាស្អីទៅវាជាអាចជាក្រុមបញ្ញវន្តឬក៏ជាស្ថាប័នស្រាវជ្រាវមួយដែលធ្វើការលើការងារស្រាវជ្រាវការតស៊ូមតិតាក់ទងទៅនឹងប្រធានបទនានាដូចជាគោលនយោបាយសង្គមយុទ្ធសាស្ត្រនយោបាយសេដ្ឋកិច្ចយោធាបច្ចេកវិទ្យាវប្បធម៌ជាដើមបាទហើយสิ่งថែងនេះភាគច្រើនបំផុតគេរកឃើញថាជាអង្គការមិនមែនរដ្ឋាភិបាលប៉ុន្តែក៏สิ่งថែងខ្លះក៏ជាគេហៅថាទីភ្នាក់ងារពាក់កណ្ដាលស្វ័យយ័តនៅក្នុងរដ្ឋាភិបាលបាទហើយត្រូវสิ่งថែងខ្លះទៀតក៏អាចថាផ្សារភ្ជាប់ជាមួយទៅនឹងគណៈបកនយោបាយអាជីវកម្មយោធាជាក់លាក់ណាមួយដែរបាទនេះជាអ្វីដែលយើងបានឃើញកន្លងមកហើយสิ่งថែងនេះមែនទែនទៅបំពេញតួនាទីដូចជាគ្រូពេទ្យអញ្ចឹងជាគ្រូពេទ្យមានន័យថាគាត់ពិនិត្យរោគសញ្ញាកំណត់រោគសញ្ញាធ្វើរោគវិនិច្ឆ័យឲ្យហើយគាត់លើកជាយោបល់ជាមតិទៅឲ្យអ្នកជំងឺថាតើគាត់ព្រមព្យាបាលឬអត់បើគាត់ព្រមបានអាចព្យាបាលជាហើយបើក្នុងនយោបាយមានន័យថាគាត់រកឃើញនៅដំណោះស្រាយផ្សេងៗហើយជូនទៅអ្នកនយោបាយអ្នកដឹកនាំតើអ្នកដឹកនាំព្រមយកគំនិតរបស់គាត់ទៅពិចារណាដើម្បីដោះស្រាយឬអត់បើអត់យកទៅនេះបញ្ហាប្រហែលជានឹងមិនអាចដោះស្រាយបានទៅតាមអ្វីដែលពួកគាត់រកឃើញនេះហើយสิ่งថែងយើងឃើញថាពីប្រទេសមួយទៅប្រទេសមួយមានភាពខុសគ្នាខ្លះហើយការខុសគ្នានេះវាអាស្រ័យទៅលើសមត្ថភាពទៅលើលទ្ធភាពទៅលើមូលនិធិទៅលើលំហសេរីភាពនិងលក្ខខណ្ឌចាំបាច់មួយចំនួនទៀតនៅក្នុងប្រទេសនីមួយៗដែលสิ่งថែងហ្នឹងគឺថាហ្នឹងបាទហើយបន្តទៅទៀតចូលចំណុចទី2ខ្ញុំដូចខ្ញុំជម្រាបខាងដើមខ្ញុំគ្រាន់តែ បង្ហាញជាទម្រង់ច្រើនជាងខ្លឹមលម្អិតក្នុងទៀតបងទី2នេះយើងចង់បង្ហាញថាតើ think tank យើងនឹងមានប្រមាណប្រភេទស្អីខ្លះយើងមើលទី1 think tank របស់សង្គមស៊ីវិលដែលជាទូទៅយើងថាសង្គមស៊ីវិលហ្នឹងជាស្ថាប័នឯករាជ្យមិនស្វែងរកផលប្រយោជន៍ហើយ think tank ទី2ជា think tank មួយដែលជាស្ថានស្រាវជ្រាវមួយដែលមានទីតាំងនៅក្នុងសាកលវិទ្យាល័យនានានិយាយបែបនេះបងប្អូនយើងពិនិត្យមើលមកកម្ពុជាហាក់ដូចជាមិនសូវត្រូវប៉ុន្តែនៅបណ្ដាប្រទេសផ្សេងៗគឺ think tank គឺមានទីតាំងនៅជាផ្នែកមួយរបស់សាកលវិទ្យាល័យនានាហ្នឹងបាទហើយទី3គឺ think tank ដែលបង្កើតឡើងដោយរដ្ឋាភិបាលឬក៏ឧបត្ថម្ភដោយរដ្ឋបាទទី4ជា think tank ដែលជាប់ទាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងធុរកិច្ចឬក៏សាជីវកម្មគេមាន think tank របស់គេដែរបាទហើយទី5គឺជា think tank ដែលជាប់ទាក់ទងជាមួយនឹងគណៈបកនយោបាយបាទគណៈបកនយោបាយហ្នឹងគេមានក្រុម think tank របស់គេដែរបាទហើយចូលចំណុចមួយទៀតគឺយើងនិយាយអំពីតួនាទីរបស់គាត់បាទតួនាទីគាត់ធ្វើអីទី1គឺផ្ដល់វេទិកាដូចថ្ងៃហ្នឹងចឹងផ្ដល់វេទិកាសម្រាប់ការអភិវឌ្ឍគំនិតដោយសេរីនិងដោយឯករាជ្យបាទអញ្ចឹងពេលដែលយើងចូលរួមមកយើងអាចជជែកវែកញែកពិភាក្សាផ្ដល់គំនិតទៅយើងអភិវឌ្ឍនៅគំនិតផ្សេងដែលពាក់ព័ន្ធនឹងដំណោះស្រាយធំនៅក្នុងបញ្ហាជាតិបញ្ហាអន្តរជាតិទី2គឺលើកកម្ពស់ការយល់ដឹងអំពីបញ្ហាធំបញ្ហារោគឆ្លងបរិស្ថាននយោបាយសេដ្ឋកិច្ចអីដែលកើតឡើងហ្នឹងគឺយើងចូលរួមក្នុងវេទិកា think tank ហ្នឹងយើងទទួលបានហ្នឹងបាទហើយទី3គឺគាត់ដើរតួនាទីជាអ្នកផ្ដល់ដំណោះស្រាយនៃជំរឿននយោបាយដែលគ្រប់គ្រងដោយផុសតាងនិងហេតុផលមានន័យថាពួកគាត់ផ្ដល់ដំណោះស្រាយសម្រាប់ឲ្យមិនអាដាមយងពើលោកបានលើកឯថាអ្នកនយោបាយអ្នកធ្វើគោលនយោបាយហ្នឹងគាត់យកទៅមើលហើយថាគាត់យកទៅសង្យោគឬក៏គាត់ជ្រើសរើសយកផ្នែកណាបាទសម្រាប់យកទៅធ្វើការផ្លាស់ប្ដូរឬក៏កំណែទម្រង់នៅក្នុងនយោបាយប៉ុន្តែរាល់ការផ្ដល់នោះគឺយើងមានផុសតាងច្បាស់លាស់ស្រាវជ្រាវច្បាស់លាស់មិនមែនផ្ដល់ជាទស្សនៈជាការយល់ឃើញលំទេបាទហើយយើងមានហេតុផលច្បាស់លាស់ដែលគួរតែត្រូវបានពិចារណាអំពីតួអង្គរដ្ឋាភិបាលបាទហើយទី3តួនាទីរបស់ think tank នេះគេហៅថាជាតួនាទីមួយ think out of the box របៀបធ្វើការរបស់គាត់គឺថាគិតចេញក្រៅប្រអប់មានន័យថាគិតឲ្យផុតពីមនោគមវិជ្ជានយោបាយក្របខ័ណ្ឌនយោបាយឬក៏ផលប្រយោជន៍ឬក៏របៀបចាស់ហ្នឹងគិតឲ្យវាឃ្លាយទៅយ៉ាងគិតឲ្យចេញពីប្រអប់ដើម្បីរកដំណោះស្រាយថ្មីពីព្រោះថានៅពេលដែលយើងយកទ្រឹស្ដីចាស់គំនិតចាស់របៀបចាស់ហើយដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាថ្មីអត់បានទេចឹងហើយត្រូវគិតឲ្យផុតពីប្រអប់គិតឲ្យផុតពីទម្លាប់ឬក៏ក្របខ័ណ្ឌចង្អៀតដើម្បីរកដំណោះស្រាយថ្មីដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាថ្មីៗទៅកើតបាទហើយទី5ដើរតួនាទីជាអ្នកជួនដំណឹងឬក៏ចែករំលែកគំនិតឬក៏ដំណោះស្រាយជាមួយអ្នកបង្កើតគោលនយោបាយសាធារណៈបាទជាមួយសាធារណជនធុរកិច្ចឬក៏សង្គមស៊ីវិលបាទទី6គឺជំរុញឲ្យមានការជជែកតែងដោលសម្របសម្រួលជាសាធារណៈដើម្បីផ្លាស់ប្ដូរគំនិតវេទិកាថ្ងៃនេះគឺជាឧទាហរណ៍មួយដែលយើងបានអញ្ជើញទាំងតួអង្គរដ្ឋតួអង្គសង្គមស៊ីវិលបាទវិស័យឯកជនឬក៏តួអង្គពាក់ព័ន្ធផ្សេងដើម្បីមកជជែកគ្នាដើម្បីផ្លាស់ប្ដូរគំនិតហ្នឹងហើយទី7គឺតាមដាននិងវិតម្លៃផលប៉ះពាល់នៃគោលនយោបាយនិងកម្មវិធីរបស់រដ្ឋាភិបាលសង្គមស៊ីវិលក៏មានតួនាទីនឹងមួយដែរហើយចុងក្រោយគឺតួនាទីរបស់ think tank ដែរគឺស្វែងរកបញ្ហាប្រឈមនិងបង្កើតទស្សនវិស័យផ្សេងសម្រាប់ដោះស្រាយទាំងបញ្ហាបច្ចុប្បន្ននិងសម្រាប់ទាំងបញ្ហាដែលកើតឡើងនៅអនាគតទៀតបាទនេះគឺខ្ញុំសូមបន្ថែមខ្លីប៉ុណ្ណឹងសម្រាប់តួនាទីរបស់ think tank បាទហើយបញ្ហាប្រឈមតើយើងមានអីខ្លះបើយើងរៀបរាប់ថាតួនាទីហ្នឹងល្អណាស់ប៉ុន្តែស្អីខ្លះជាបញ្ហាប្រឈមទី1ខ្ញុំបានមើលច្រើនដែរឃើញទី1មុនគេហ្នឹងគឺមូលនិធិហ្នឹងចំការពិបាករកឬក៏រកបានតែមិនសូវថិតថេរមិនទៀងទាត់ចឹងទៅពិបាកហើយធ្វើអីអត់លុយធ្វើការអត់កើតទេសូម្បីតែវេទិកាថ្ងៃនេះបើអត់លុយធ្វើអត់កើតដែរហើយយើងតម្រាំរកលុយបានធ្វើនៅពេលនេះយើងពិបាកទី2គុណភាពនិងសមត្ថភាពមានន័យថាសមត្ថភាពរបស់ think tank ខ្លួនឯងต้องមានកម្រិតពេលខ្លះហើយគុណភាពក្នុងការស្រាវជ្រាវក្នុងការសរសេរជារបាយការណ៍ឬក៏ក្នុងការជះឥទ្ធិពលទៅភាគីពាក់ព័ន្ធជាពិសេសគឺអ្នក ធ្វើគោលនយោបាយឬក៏សាធារណជននោះពេលខ្លះយើងក៏មានកម្រិតដែរហ្នឹងហើយតែធ្វើឲ្យយើងអាចខ្លាំងគ្រប់គ្រាន់ហ្នឹងក្នុងករណីខ្លះទី3គឺឯករាជ្យភាពនិងស្វ័យភាពពេលខ្លះយើងអត់ឯករាជ្យដោយសារតែមានសម្ពាធនយោបាយឬក៏សម្ពាធពីទូអង្គណាមួយទៅគឺធ្វើយើងបាត់ឯករាជ្យបាត់ស្វ័យភាពហ្នឹងបាទតែកាលណាបាត់ឯករាជ្យបាត់ស្វ័យភាពគេមើលឃើញថាយើងគ្មានជំហរមួយច្បាស់លាស់បាទទី4ការចាក់ចពលឬការចូលរួមដោយប្រសិទ្ធភាពជាមួយនឹងអ្នកធ្វើគោលនយោបាយនិងសាធារណជនកន្លែងនេះចង់បញ្ជាក់ថាយើងចង់ដើរតួនាទីជាអតិពលចង់ដើរតួនាទីជជែកឲ្យមានប្រសិទ្ធភាពជាមួយគេប៉ុន្តែយើងខ្វះបាទយើងខ្វះសមត្ថភាពលទ្ធភាពឬគុណភាពយើងមានកម្រិតអញ្ចឹងហើយគេអត់ស្ដាប់យើងគេអត់ទទួលយកមតិយោបល់យើងអាហ្នឹងក៏ជាបញ្ហាដែរជាបញ្ហាប្រឈមដែលយើងឃើញកន្លងមកបាទហើយចំណុចទី5គឺជារឿងខ្លួនឯងរបស់ស៊ីងថែរឿងខ្លួនឯងនៅទីនេះមានន័យថាស៊ីងថែដូចគ្នាប៉ុន្តែអត់ឯកភាពគ្នាអត់ចោះសម្រងគ្នាខ្វះការជឿជាក់ទុកចិត្តគ្នាក្នុងការដៃខ្លះដោយសារយករបាំងនយោបាយសាសនាជាតិសាសន៍អីចឹងមួយចំនួនទៅការយកឃើញគ្នាទៅអត់ឯកភាពគ្នាប៉ុន្តែថ្ងៃនេះជាចំណុចចាប់ផ្ដើមមួយតែវិទ្យាស្ថានទំនាក់ទំនងអន្តរជាតិនៃកម្ពុជានៃរាជរដ្ឋាភិបាលកម្ពុជាព្យាយាមបង្កើតវេទិកាភ្នំពេញទី1ហ្នឹងដើម្បីប្រមូលស៊ីងថែងទាំងអស់មកពីណាក៏ដោយដើម្បីឲ្យយើងចាប់ដើមយល់គ្នាទាំងក្នុងស្រុកទាំងក្នុងតំបន់ទាំងក្រៅតំបន់ដើម្បីធ្វើការជាមួយគ្នាបាទអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំគិតថាពីនេះទៅមុខបន្តស៊ីងថែងទាំងអស់នឹងចាប់ដើមយល់គ្នានឹងធ្វើការជាមួយគ្នាបាទហើយចំណុចទី6ដែលជាចំណុចចុងក្រោយនៃបញ្ហាប្រឈមនេះគឺយើងបានរកឃើញថាលំហសេរីភាពនិងសម្ពាធនយោបាយក៏ជាបញ្ហាប្រឈមដែរស៊ីងថែងនៅប្រទេសខ្លះសេរីភាពក្នុងការធ្វើសកម្មភាពនោះគឺចង្អៀតមែនទេបាទនេះគឺជាអ្វីដែលលើកឡើងហើយខ្ញុំមិនមានឧទាហរណ៍ជាក់លាក់ទេដែលខ្ញុំបានជម្រាបខាងដើមប៉ុន្តែយើងគ្រាន់តែលើកជាបញ្ហាច្បល់ដើម្បីពិចារណាទាំងអស់គ្នាបាទឥឡូវសួរថានៅពេលដែលយើងមានបញ្ហាប្រឈមអញ្ចឹងដោះស្រាយយ៉ាងម៉េចនេះបើសិនជាយើងចង់ស្រាវជ្រាវទៅធ្វើការស្រាវជ្រាវតាក់ទងនឹងស៊ីងថែងខ្លួនឯងហ្នឹងហើយបានចម្លើយយកមកនិយាយនៅទីនេះប៉ុន្តែអ្វីដែលខ្ញុំបង្ហាញនៅទីនេះគ្រាន់តែជាការប្រមូលនៅការស្រាវជ្រាវដែលមានស្រាប់ហើយសង្ខេបខ្លីៗយកមកជម្រាបជូនអង្គពិធីទេមិញនេះយើងនិយាយបញ្ហាប្រឈមហើយដំណោះស្រាយហ្នឹងក៏វាគ្រាន់តែផ្ទុយហ្នឹងដែរទី1គឺត្រូវខំរកមូលនិធិហ្នឹងឲ្យបានច្រើនបំផុតបាទតាមដែលអាចធ្វើទៅបានឲ្យវាមានស្ថិរភាពទី2ពង្រឹងគុណភាពសមត្ថភាពក្នុងការស្រាវជ្រាវក៏ដូចជាការតស៊ូមតិទី3ពង្រឹងឯកភាពនិងស្វ័យភាពនៅក្នុងការបំពេញភារកិច្ចរបស់ខ្លួនបាទទី4គឺពង្រឹងការចេះអត្តពលនិងការចូលរួមប្រកបដោយប្រសិទ្ធភាពជាមួយអ្នកធ្វើគោលនយោបាយនិងសាធារណជនបើសិនជាយើងស្រាវជ្រាវបានហើយស្អីហើយប៉ុន្តែយើងចេះអត្តពលយើងតស៊ូមតិនឹងអត់បានវាស្មើនឹងអត់ប្រយោជន៍ដែរបាទរកឃើញឆ្នាំហើយប៉ុន្តែគេអត់ព្រមចាក់រកឃើញគំនិតល្អគេអត់ព្រមទទួលបាទនេះក៏ជាបញ្ហាដែរបាទហើយទី5គឺត្រូវតែពង្រឹងឯកភាពការចោះសម្រងការជឿទុកចិត្តនៅក្នុងចំណោមស៊ីងថែងខ្លួនឯងដែរគេអត់ចូលរួមគេអត់ស្ដាប់រឿងមួយប៉ុន្តែខ្លួនយើងអត់ឯកភាពគ្នាអាហ្នឹងជារឿងដែលសំខាន់មួយទៀតបាទទី6យើងធ្វើថ្ងៃនេះក៏ក្នុងន័យនឹងដែរគឺការកសាងបណ្ដាញបន្ទាប់ពីការកសាងបណ្ដាញហើយកសាងរបៀបធ្វើការគោលការណ៍ទស្សនវិស័យចក្ខុវិស័យច្បាស់លាស់ដើម្បីតើយើងធ្វើការយ៉ាងម៉េចហើយយើងទៅជួយសង្គមជួយពិភពលោកបែបណាមិញនេះនៅក្នុងការចាប់ផ្ដើមនេះយើងឃើញវិក្កាមិនទាំងអស់ព្រមទាំងឯកឧត្តមប្រធានគណៈបតីហ្នឹងក៏លោកបានលើកថាយើងមានបញ្ហាច្រើនណាស់បញ្ហាបរិស្ថានបញ្ហាជំងឺឆ្លងបញ្ហាសន្តិសុខទាំងប្រពៃណីទាំងមិនប្រពៃណីអីជាច្រើនប៉ុន្តែដំណោះស្រាយហាក់ដូចជានៅមានកម្រិតឬមួយក៏មានដំណោះស្រាយមកប៉ុន្តែការទទួលយកទៅដោះស្រាយវាហាក់ដូចជានៅមានកម្រិតដែរអញ្ចឹងហើយតែយើងធ្វើយ៉ាងម៉េចដើម្បីដោះស្រាយបញ្ហានេះហើយចុងក្រោយខ្ញុំគូបញ្ជាក់ឡើងវិញថាវិធានគូក្បាលនេះគឺជាដៃគូបំពេញបន្ថែមជាមួយនឹងអ្នកធ្វើគោលនយោបាយជាមួយសាធារណជនធុរកិច្ចឬក៏សង្គមស៊ីវិល ហើយធនាគារខួរក្បាលក៏ដើរតួនាទីជាកញ្ចក់ឆ្លុះបញ្ចាំងគោលនយោបាយការដឹកនាំនិងដំណោះស្រាយផ្សេងៗចំពោះបញ្ហាដែលកំពុងកើតឡើងនៅក្នុងសង្គមដែរយើងឃើញបញ្ហាកើតឡើងច្រើនណាស់ខ្ញុំមិនលើកឡើងវិញទេដោយសារតែនៅក្នុងពិធីបើកគេបានលើករួចហើយហេតុនេះស្អីដែលជាការសន្និដ្ឋានចុងក្រោយរបស់ខ្ញុំសូមឲ្យធនាគារខួរក្បាលអ្នកកំណត់គោលនយោបាយសាធារណជនវិស័យធុរកិច្ចសង្គមស៊ីវិលគួរតែកុំឲ្យចាត់ទុកគ្នាជាដៃគូប្រកួតប្រជែងកុំឲ្យចាត់ទុកគ្នាជាសត្រូវប៉ុន្តែដៃគូទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងគួរតែអង្គុយជាមួយគ្នាជជែកគ្នាហើយផ្លាស់ប្ដូរគំនិតគ្នាដើម្បីដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាអ្នកធ្វើគោលនយោបាយរដ្ឋាភិបាលអ្នកអនុវត្តដែលមានអំណាចអនុវត្តប៉ុន្តែអ្នកស្រាវជ្រាវគាត់មានអំណាចខាងការសិក្សាស្រាវជ្រាវគាត់រកឃើញគាត់ជួនយោបល់ទៅហើយដៃគូទាំងអស់ហ្នឹងគួរតែអង្គុយជាមួយគ្នាមិនមែនជាសត្រូវជាមួយគ្នាទេចឹងហើយបើសិនជាយើងអាចបានធ្វើហ្នឹងទេបញ្ហាមួយចំនួនយើងដោះមិនបានល្អទេបាទសូមអរគុណសូមបញ្ចប់ប៉ុណ្ណឹងបាទ
សូមអរគុណលោកបណ្ឌិតចុកបន្ថងខ្ញុំសូមសង្ខេបបន្តិចបំពេញមិញនេះលោកបានលើកអំពីចំណុច5ទី1សេចក្តីផ្ដើមទី2លោកលើកអំពីប្រភពនៃ think tank ហើយទី3លោកបង្ហាញអំពីប្រភេទនៃ think tank លោកបានបង្ហាញមាន6ចំណុចហើយតួនាទីមាន8ចំណុចដែលលោកបានបកស្រាយជូនអង្គវិធីទាំងមូលហើយនឹងបញ្ហាប្រឈមនេះលោករកឃើញចំណុច6បន្ទាប់ពីបញ្ហាប្រឈមមកលោកបានរកឃើញដំណោះស្រាយហើយលោកមានជំហាន6ជំហានទៀតអំពីដោះស្រាយពីបញ្ហាប្រឈមធំនៅក្នុងការដែលកើតមានឡើងនៅក្នុងសង្គមក៏ដូចនៅក្នុងពិភពលោកនាបច្ចុប្បន្ននេះហើយលោកបានសន្និដ្ឋានបញ្ចប់បាទសូមអរគុណលោកបណ្ឌិតជាកិច្ចបន្តសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញលោកបណ្ឌិតDaniel Snowkill សូមគោរពអញ្ជើញបាទសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញលោកបណ្ឌិតបាទ
Thank you very much. First of all, I have to apologize because I do not have a slide presentation, and that probably also shows my understanding of think tanks. It's about debating with each other. That's what I think is the main thing, to find the best solutions. And as I do not want to repeat what is already said, I just try to emphasize a few things and a few points what I think is important. And I mean, I'm working for Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for already 8 years, and that is a well-known think tank. We are among the best in the world, among the best in Europe. We have the best network, that's what the University of Pennsylvania at least is saying in their think tank ranking about us. And that is also what I think is very important, that I see think tanks between universities that do the base research and governments and policymakers, and our job is to advise them. That means we have to be political to a certain degree. We need networks into politics because otherwise they will not listen to us. But on the other hand, we cannot be politicized in the sense of our job is not to repeat what the government is saying in public. Our job is more to work with the government, maybe behind closed doors, but sometimes also when it's necessary to bring up some public pressure to come to better solutions. In the previous presentation, it was mentioned that think tanks, research institutes, NGOs, they need to work together. I would say yes, they need to work together, but what is more important, they have to debate with each other because everyone has different ideas. When you are on social science, on political science, it's a lot about interpretation of the future. Especially when we are at the International Relations Institute of Cambodia at the moment. International relations is a lot of speculation what might happen in the future. But the honest answer is we do not know. We do not know what will happen. That's why we need this debate and come to conclusions that are more reasonable. But that's also important that we agree to disagree sometimes. What I think is also important is that in this research institute and in these debates we are having, we need some inclusiveness. And I'm always a bit worried when I'm sitting on a panel that is just male and there's no female voice. I think that is already 50% of the population is missing. We are missing out on ideas, on different perspectives. That's why I'm very keen, and it's not just about women, it's about in general to listen to different voices and to include them in our debates and giving them a space to discuss. That comes to the question of space. Space is needed for political research institutes, as we are. We need the space in a sense of the political space that we are allowed to do our research, that we are allowed to debate, that we are also allowed to go into public with our ideas. And that is not the case in every country when we look around the globe. For Cambodia, I would say the situation is getting better because we are here, we discuss, we have a lot of new research institutes recently, and they have these connections and they do these debates, and that's why the situation is not perfect here. There is still a lot of room for improvement, but we are getting there. The other thing is funding. Funding is very important because at the end of the day, if we do not have the resources, we cannot do our job. I can give you a small example from my country, from Germany. The way we fund research institutes, also the way we fund political parties, the way we fund universities, is that the government basically provides the money, but the government is not telling what they need to do, what kind of research they're going to do. So in this system, you have on one hand, you have sustainable funding. On the other hand, you have freedom of research, freedom of speech. I'm not telling that is something that could work in every country, but we need to discuss the question of funding. Can be private donations, can be government donations, but without funding, it will be very difficult to do the job. These research institutes, they have to be independent. Yeah, it's super important. We are researchers at the end, and if we are afraid to go there, then we cannot do our job right, and then we are losing a lot of power when it comes to bringing the best solutions for policymakers, and that's how I see the job mainly, to work with policymakers. Yeah. I think I made all my points, and what I'm looking forward to is to go into a debate, to learn from different countries, because the situation is different in every country, and there are so many solutions out there, but we need to have this open debate, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'm also looking forward to have your questions later in the panel and to discuss with all of you later. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. បាទខ្ញុំសូមអរគុណលោកបណ្ឌិតដែលបានលើកឡើងនៅការស្រាវជ្រាវមួយដែលទាក់ទងទៅនឹងការងារ research ជាពិសេសទាក់ទងនឹងអង្គការរបស់លោកនិងទូរទស្សន៍របស់អង្គការលោកដែលជាមួយនឹងសង្គមស៊ីវិលជាមួយនឹងប្រជាជនហើយទីជាការស្រាវជ្រាវមួយដ៏មានសារៈសំខាន់ដែលបានចែករំលែកដល់អង្គពិធីយើងនេះព្រឹកនេះបាទសូមអរគុណហើយជាកិច្ចបន្តខ្ញុំសូមគោរពលោកបណ្ឌិតជ័យឡុងបាទសូមគោរពជើញលោកបណ្ឌិតជ័យ
Once again, my name is Kim Long, and it's my pleasure and honor to be here to share with you my perspective as well as my experience. I do not also want to repeat what Dr. Chotman Chong and also Dr. Daniel Smoking have mentioned, but I can recycle some of the ideas and also refocus some of the points. I think today's plenary session is about how think tanks and NGO can contribute to addressing some of the pressing issues and challenges of our time together. And from the many types of think tanks that have been discussed so far, some think tanks work on different issues, and I concur with the idea of Dr. Daniel Smoking with regard to the diversity. And with the diversity, we have different opinions. People have different sets of interpretation, perception, and understanding of even the same core issue. And that's why we come to how think tanks can and should work together, discuss together, but based on what foundations, what can make think tanks valuable, as provide some value addition to the policy shaping and policy making, whether it is for the government, whether for the private sector, or whether just for the general public. That comes to two things that I can recycle from what both presenters have talked. Is the quality. The quality comes with the questions of trust. The quality have to deal with research methods and methodologies. My speech at the opening sessions with regard to do think tank think, can think tank really think, or we just recycle some of the ideas. Recycle it correctly and provide policy feedback to the research community and to the decision makers correctly or not. That is the question. So it comes to the quality in terms of how capable a think tanker can think and can engage in the data collection for policy making. So the second part, in addition to the quality, method and methodologies that are always the problems boggling down researchers, scholars, think tankers, is those associated with their opportunity to engage. The second point is whether think tankers, researchers, and scholars have the opportunity to engage themselves with other think tankers and policy makers. The opportunity to engage, to share perspective, insight freely, independently, and inclusively is very important. So do we have that opportunity? Is opportunity assured and encouraged by not only the government, the people themselves? I give you one example in the Cambodian context. People always mock those who have PhD degree as a doctoral degree. People mock sometimes in a very jokingly way, funny way. They say, oh yeah, why you have to listen to those with PhD degree? PhD people with PhD degree like me, do nothing to them. But we just want to provide value, to add more value to the policy shaping, policy making for the government. Whether the public, whether the government, private sector take it or not, we don't care. It's not our interest. Our interest whether we contribute to those policy making to address the challenges in a more effective and more inclusive way for building an inclusive, resilient, and strong and robust society together. Not only for Cambodian, but think tanks produce ideas. Ideas become public goods, should be public goods and should also be private good. Because we talk about different type of think tanks. Some think tanks are associated with private institutions, private organizations, profit-making institutions. We serve the interests of those private institutions only for the part of those research and policy interest, that part. But in general, think tanks serve the interests of the general public, of the community. The third point, in addition to that, to help think tanks be a valuable institutions to be able to contribute to society, to the government, is the ability to obtain comprehensive set of data. Data is not only about numbers. Information information by the government, information from the government, information from civil society organization, information on the ground from the public, the general public, with comprehensive set of data available at hand, and with the capabilities of think tankers, scholars, researchers to be able to digest those information, those data, and then not only to digest, but to make use of those data according to their methods, to the appropriate, the proper method and research methodologies for analysis. That come to the questions of whether can think tank think, do they really think, can their thinking, producing policy thoughts and insights contribute to policy making, shaping the policy dimensions of various stakeholders or not. And I'd like to end my talk here, and one advantage of think tanker is that I can talk whatever, but within the context of my own convictions that what I can talk as a think tanker contribute to the bodies of research, and also to the publications and dissemination of those information, that at the end of the day it will improve, it not improve, contribute to the development of humanity, because humanity is a collection of individuals and societies that feed on the good information, feed on the informations we get, whether from those ruling the country, those ruling the distribution and production of economic goods and services, and also the consumers of those goods and services, whether the goods or services produced by the government under the auspices of the state-owned enterprises or the private enterprises, or whether intellectual goods and services produced by think tanks are the intellectual NGOs, and also the media, which are the fourth important mechanisms, shaping the views, perception, and also how society and humanity move forward. With that note, I'd like to end my remarks, and thank you so much for your attention.
បាទសូមអរគុណលោកបណ្ឌិតដែលបានលើកឡើងដល់មានសារៈសំខាន់ស្ទើរតទៅនឹងការគិតអ្វីដែលត្រូវគិតពីអីហើយយកទៅណាអញ្ចឹងគឺសិតជាគំនិតល្អៗណាដែលយើងបានទទួលនៅការបង្ហាញអំពីបទពិសោធន៍និងរបៀបនៃការគិតដែលលោកបណ្ឌិតបានជូនទៅក្នុងអង្គពិធីទាំងមូលបាទអរសូមអរគុណលោកបណ្ឌិតថាជាកិច្ចបន្តខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញលោកបណ្ឌិតតាមស្រីដាក់តុងអង្គទីគេបាទសូមគោរពអញ្ជើញ
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, session chairman, my fellow panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This morning, I would like to take this opportunity to share some observations of mine on the NGO, the roles of NGO and think tanks from the perspective of developing countries. I couldn't represent the views of all the developing nations in the region, but suffice to say that so far, through my years of experience as a policymaker in Malaysia, as well as my present position as a think tanker, I have the benefits of both worlds. So perhaps this may help us to strike the right balance sometimes, when we need to make some adjustments to our roles in order to make our endeavor a sustainable one. Ladies and gentlemen, in countries where aspirations of the people are genuinely given due cognizance, NGOs with the inclusion of think tanks are certainly part of the system, part of the stakeholders' ecosystems in the nation's governance. Beyond any denial, they do represent voices and aspiration of certain segment of the society, though their views may not necessarily be consistent with that of the ruling elite at all times. Ladies and gentlemen, while government of the day, which believes in the essence, believes in the essence of democratic consultation, is expected to have sufficient latitude of magnanimity for accommodating dissent, NGOs and think tanks themselves, perhaps, they must realize that their advisory and watchdog roles to help shape the nation's governance is wedded in spearheading the well-being of the people. It is not tantamount to a carte blanche to usurp the powers vested in the government of the day for their self-gains. Much less should they themselves be utilized by foreign powers as a Trojan horse to serve the geopolitical interests of foreign countries. Over the years, ladies and gentlemen, the love-hate relations between the administration and the NGOs has been evident in many countries, particularly in the developing world. It has become so delicate that government of the day, which can handle the NGOs well, is expected to be rewarded with handsome political brownie points in return when people's mandate is sought in election. From the perspective of ruling parties, ladies and gentlemen, NGO with strong following can always play a useful machinery for mobilizing support for the ruling parties, should the NGO's demands be met, or at the very least, promised to be met after election. But on the contrary, any botched handling of the relations is not just a communication disaster, but more importantly, it may even bring down the government of the day. Be that as it may, ladies and gentlemen, NGOs in many countries are generally astute enough to position themselves as a pressure groups. This is a term commonly used in Malaysia and our part of the world. Pressure groups with specific political interest and leaning. When the chips are down in election, whichever side of the divide the NGOs seek to work with, they are bound to be colored in the political spectrum. By and large, NGOs with social intervening agenda could hardly be above partisan politics, as they need to have a political vehicle to spearhead their cause. Ladies and gentlemen, within my time allotment of 10 minutes, perhaps I should spend some time on think tank as well. In the case of think tank, unlike the NGOs, its role is generally beyond easy comprehension among the public. This morning, I learned something new from my Cambodian friend, our Dr. Kim Long, that in the Cambodian language, perhaps that might invite a lot of speculation or even wild guess about the definition or the roles of think tanks. Similarly, in Malaysia, I face the same problem. Whenever I use the terminology 智库 in Mandarin, in Chinese, people tend to interpret it as talent of wisdom. But what talent of wisdom are you talking about? Talent of wisdom. Does it mean to say that talent of wisdom encompasses all? You know all, you know everything, you are the Almighty? Certainly not. But ladies and gentlemen, the frequently asked question that whether think tank is part of the government machinery or is it just an independent advisory panel? This has been a good indicator of the public comprehension of the topic, to say the least. As we are aware to date, think tank is no longer the monopoly of the state. More and more political parties across the region are running their own think tanks. The interesting question arising now is whether these think tanks should be granted with the independence of intellectuality like any other research-based academic or intellectual institutions, though they might be funded by the state or political parties. In countries practicing multi-party parliamentary democracy where electoral outcome matters, most if not all politicians from both sides of the divide are invariably ballot conscious. I repeat, ballot conscious. Many may resort to populist politics by pandering to the greed and emotions of the electorate. In this context, political expediency overrides all at the expense of even the most prudent and genuinely patriotic advice put forth by the think tanks in the world. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, this explains the general frustration of government-backed or party-sponsored think tanks in the developing world, where their self-perception of playing second fiddle to the sitting politicians is relatively real and pronounced. More often than not, views of these think tanks would just conveniently be brushed aside under the guise of giving way to the so-called real politic. I repeat, real politic. This is a term frequently used by some politicians, not all politicians, but some politicians. Real politics. And this is none other than just a convenient euphemism for political expediency. Ladies and gentlemen, on the research front, the question that whether they are given the liberty to conduct free and independent survey poll without towing the line of political correctness is indeed another real challenge confronting many think tank researchers. But the dismaying reality remains that many think tanks are deliberately made convenient mouthpieces for the administration, while some think tanks might be left dysfunctional if they choose to be defiant. While yearning for having a free hand in upholding the independence and integrity of think tanks in the developing world, ladies and gentlemen, one shouldn't envy those think tanks financed by non-governmental sectors, especially those in the West, as neither have they been spared from the same conundrum, except that they are made subservient to the non-governmental paymasters in state. All in all, in reality, latitude for survival for the genuinely independent think tanks across the world is relatively small. This poses a real litmus test to the intellectual integrity and independence of think tanks today. Ladies and gentlemen, perhaps before I conclude my remarks, we should take a look at the functionalities of the think tanks. Functions. What functions have they been playing so far? Is there any possibility for us to explore a new dimension of the various functionalities of think tanks? Perhaps the least explored dimension is that linked to public diplomacy, particularly the track 2 diplomacy, which involves people connectivity via unofficial means. While official track 1 diplomacy underscores the government-to-government diplomatic relations, track 2 diplomacy is of no less significance in addressing the ever-widening trust deficit This serves as a useful tool for averting conflict through the promotion of bilateral understanding between any two countries. In short, think tanks can now be tasked with an expanded role of promoting peace and understanding through networking and interaction. And today we are here to witness the inaugural inception of such an alliance spearheaded by IRIC. Congratulations to the host. For think tanks with government backing, ladies and gentlemen, perhaps I may say that they have the best of both worlds. On one hand, they have the resources of track one diplomacy from the government side, and on the other hand, they have the people-to-people connection, the connectivity network under the track two diplomacy. And this is going to be an added advantage in facilitating the inter-nations connectivity with both resources from the official and unofficial aspect. Perhaps we may call this the track 1.5 diplomacy. And this could turn out to be one of the key roles for think tanks in many years to come. Last but not least, ladies and gentlemen, it is my sincere wish to see that our think tanks, particularly those in Southeast Asia, within our ASEAN region, we can stay in sync with the people's aspiration. People's aspirations are ever changing, but we must keep abreast with the changing times and the changing aspirations. On this note, I thank you for your attention.
សូមអរគុណដុកទ័របានបង្ហាញនិងបានលើកអំពីបទពិសោធន៍របស់ NGO រវាងប្រទេសកំពុងអភិវឌ្ឍពិសេសលោកបានបង្ហាញពីបទពិសោធន៍ការធ្វើទំនាក់ទំនងរវាងNGO ទូនទី NGO ជាមួយប្រជាពលរដ្ឋជាមួយអ្នកធម៌និងជាមួយនឹងផលប្រយោជន៍ដែលយើងកំពុងតែត្រូវការនៅក្នុងតំបន់ក៏ដូចជានៅក្នុងអាស៊ានយើងនេះបាទសូមអរគុណជាបន្តខ្ញុំសូមគោរពដុកទ័រនឹងវិទ្យាទៅនេះ
Good morning again. Think tanks, particularly in the context of international relations. The questions we look at are fairly straightforward. What's going on? How long is this going to last? How do we fix it? Now, this basis of this came striking home yesterday morning at 10 a.m. when I was sitting at my desk and my power went out. I was sitting, I was diligently working, the electricity went off. What do? Well, I went on Twitter. I wanted to see, okay, is there a journalist report on this? Is there a power outage in Phnom Penh? We've had a few, what's going on? Nothing, no information. All right, I go on and I check His Excellency, the Minister of Education, the Minister of Information's Facebook feed, because he posts actively, and it's the Ministry of Information. I check with government. Nope, nothing's clear. Still have no idea what's going on. Now, I'm also the Vice Provost of a university. We have an engineering department. I could easily call a colleague who's an electrical engineer. I checked the fuse box, it wasn't working. Who could try to tell me what's going on, how do I fix this? But I'm a political scientist. I'm not an electrical engineer. I have no idea what he's talking about. It's too technical. So eventually I phone up my landlord and explain this, etc. A representative of civil society, a local business person. And she says, let me check, let me get back to you. And I'm going through all of the possible causes for the loss of electricity, the annoyance this is causing as my apartment is getting hotter and hotter, as I'm wasting more and more time. And after considering all of the potential variants, power outage, issue with the transmission line, wiring problem, she told me, I'm sorry, I forgot to pay the bill. I'll take care of it later today. And that is essentially, at its core, the world that think tanks operate in. We operate in a relationship with academia, we operate in a relationship with media, we operate in a relationship with government, and we operate in a relationship with civil society. Yet think tanks are distinct. They're not the same. They have different roles. And I think that when we have a discussion about the future of think tanks, we have to begin with conceptualization. We have to begin by asking and re-asking, what we're here for and what our role is, what value we add that is distinct from those other entities. So let's just narrow down to three: academia, media, think tanks. And yes, I would say think tanks do have a different role from academia. When we think about academia, we think about the development of theory. We think about the development of research programs. We think about the development of knowledge for knowledge's sake. We measure impact in academia most often by citations in Scopus-ranked journals, as opposed to has anyone actually followed up on this and has it actually been put in practice somewhere. We think about media. We look at media events, speed, information, measurement in terms of the number of readers, how many people are you reaching out to, etc. That's the measurement of impact. Think tanks, we cross these lines. Yes, analysis, in my view, is the key, providing quality, timely analysis. But in order to do that, we need the skill set of academia in terms of the methodology, in terms of the knowledge of the literature, etc. We also need access. We need to be in dialogue with partners from government, with partners from across civil society. And we have the unique role as think tankers to be able to engage at the track 2 and track 1.5 level, raising questions, topics, etc., in ways that may not have been raised before, and at times are potentially uncomfortable to raise, potentially unpleasant. That's our job, that's our role. To pivot, we also see challenges. As Dr. Schmucking mentioned, the University of Pennsylvania, the Lauder Institute, provides us with a wonderful ranking of think tanks every year. And as much as think tank folks, we all pretend to deny it, we all go rushing to look at the rankings whenever they come out every year to see who's where, who's doing what, etc. It's fascinating. The metrics are unique, but we'll leave it there. At the same time, what the Lauder Institute and what Penn has showed us is we are in a golden age of think tanks. Every week we hear of a new think tank being established. Not just private, not just government, at universities. There's a running joke in the United States that every professor's office simply has their name and then below it a little plaque that says the Institute for the Study of something, which is simply their office and their name. Okay? We've got a lot of think tanks. But the think tank world, because of this quantity, also faces severe challenges. The most important one being quality. Quality of research, quality of analysis, taking the time not to put out the hot take, not to put out the rapid quote, not to put out the expected answer, but to actually engage, to engage with one's network, to engage with theory, to use proper methodology in order to do correct research. At the same time, the great challenge to that quality is a question that, as think tanks, as experts, constantly needs to be in our head. The issue of modesty. The issue of saying, yes, I am an expert on this topic. I am not an expert on that topic. I can't tell you anything. I know probably just as much as anybody else who reads the Financial Times or the New York Times. That's about it. But yeah, it's all great to see our names in print, it's all great to do another research project, but admitting that, yeah, there are differences, and specialization, as we know from economics, matters. Second, rigor. Methodological rigor in analysis, rigor in data collection, if one's doing research along those lines, etc. This is a significant challenge. We regularly see studies coming out saying, oh, this new study came out, we did this survey, etc., and this shows Cambodia's perception of China. I read a study about this the other day. It involved interviewing 200 people, which is fascinating. Interviewing 200 people methodologically tells me nothing. Absolutely nothing. Methodology can't be skipped. It's not a step that can be skipped. Think tanks are not there simply for, I've read about something for 2 years and here's my opinion. No, we don't need that. That's not going to move us forward. That's not going to contribute to an informed dialogue. Third, the question of impact. How do we measure our impact? In some ways, perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps our biggest impact is simply getting people in the room, is simply having discussions. that, yes, if they do result in change, if they do result in a positive policy solution, well, we shouldn't take credit for that. Our credit comes from simply being facilitators and being able to add data, add information, add responsible knowledge, combat misinformation, etc. Finally, two last challenges that have to be confronted. The first, transparency. The question of funding has been addressed by many panelists, and funding for any think tank is always an issue. Everyone knows it. Everyone spends hours writing grants, doing reports, etc. It is an issue. But one thing that, and particularly as stated in the declaration that will be signed later on today, is a shared commitment to transparency. If a think tank is a state-funded think tank, wonderful. No reason that the state-funded think tank shouldn't exist. If a think tank is fully private, privately funded, great, release your donors. Let people know who's funding you. Be clear that your work, that our work, is about the work. It is not about a different agenda, a government-driven agenda, a donor-driven agenda. It is about the question one is asked. And to have credibility as a think tank, one needs to go and say, yeah, you might not like the answer I give you, but that's what you called me for. That's what you called us for, is because you need someone to answer that. Finally, there's the question of sustainability, of how think tanks will move forward and continue to exist and survive over time. And I think one of the areas we do need to move into, noting the fact that there is a proliferation of think tanks, is deepening the bonds of cooperation and collaboration between differing think tanks, not seeing ourselves as competing for everything. Competition is wonderful, but to actually build, if we're going to build track 1.5, track 2 discussion and dialogue, bringing different governments and countries together, how are we able to function and do that if we cannot regularly and consistently work together? Thus, that's why one of the reasons I'm very happy to be here today, and why it's so wonderful to see IRIC and the Royal Academy modeling that sort of cooperation, collaboration between differing think tanks. I'm sure I've gone over time. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. On the ticket mole, ការបកស្រាយរបស់វាគ្មិនយើងទាំង5រូបបានចប់សពគ្រប់ហើយយើងនៅសល់ពេល20នាទីទៀតដើម្បីមានសំណួរចម្លើយបានครับអញ្ចឹងសូមអង្គប្រតិទាំងមូលដែលមានសំណួរចម្លើយសូមអាចមានសំណួរសូមអញ្ជើញសួរមកវាគ្មិនដែលលោកចង់សួរចង់បានពុទ្ធិនឹងចំណេះដឹងថ្មីៗឲ្យលោកបានបកស្រាយពេញថាបាទសូមក្រុមជើងបាទប្រសិនបើមានសំណួរសូមក្រុមជើងយើងមានពេល20នាទីបន្តទៀតបាទបន្ទាប់ពីយើងចប់អង្គពិភាក្សាទី1ទៅចូលដល់អង្គពិភាក្សាលើកទី2បាទសូមក្រុមជើងបាទសូមក្រុមជើង
សារសំណួរខ្ញុំចោទសួរទៅវិក្កាមិនដែលនិយាយជាភាសាអង់គ្លេសអញ្ចឹង
សូមឲ្យតំងជួយបង្ហាញឈ្មោះឲ្យអញ្ជើញមកពីខាងណាបាទសូម
ឈ្មោះអ៊ុនគៀងហើយសប្តាហ៍នេះជាសមាជិកក្រុមប្រឹក្សាវិបាលមជ្ឈមណ្ឌលអភិវឌ្ឍកម្ពុជាហើយនឹងជាសាស្ត្រាចារ្យមកពីសាកលវិទ្យាល័យ Northern Illinois University នៅសហរដ្ឋអាមេរិកហើយសប្តាហ៍នេះខ្ញុំជាសាស្ត្រាចារ្យទស្សនកិច្ចនៅសាកលវិទ្យាល័យក្នុងអាមេរិកកម្ពុជាThis question is directed to Dr. Smoking, pertaining to the issue of collaboration, cooperation, as one of our presenters has raised a while ago. But I think that the issue here is about the connection between a think tank in Western industrialized country and think tank in the developing world. And as we see the events that have been happening across the globe, from Ukraine to the South China Sea, there's been a divide ideologically, politically, and geopolitically as well. And there has been sort of issue raised over the years concerning the fact that think tank in advanced industrialized country tend to want to promote one form of policies, one form of quote-unquote ideology. Is there any way that sort of contestation or division could be overcome in terms of think tank agenda and future vision?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I think the most important point is what Bradley said earlier, it's transparency. We need to know who's behind the institutes and what is the agenda, right? Then you can judge what is the mission, what is the agenda, is it really free? How is the atmosphere in these research institutes, what they're going to do? And yes, we have this divide. We have this divide between think tanks in the US that get funding from a certain party and they're clearly on a mission, for example. But you also have think tanks funded by a certain government working abroad. I mean, China and Russia are typical for doing that in foreign countries, and they are on a mission. And then you have institutes like ours. I would say we are quite harmless. Yes, we promote democracy, freedom of speech, human rights, that's what we do, but we make an offer. You can come to us, you can debate with us, or you can leave the offer. So, and I think there's a different idea and a different approach. Yes, that's what I meant when I said earlier they need to be political but not politicized. And I think the key is transparency, and if you do not know who's behind, then there's already a big problem.
បាទអរគុណច្រើនហើយគុណមានសំណួរទៀតទេសូមគោរពជើងបាទសូមជើងបាទសូមជើងអ្នកគ្រប់បាទសូមជើងហើយសូមបង្ហាញឈ្មោះហើយនឹងប្រពន្ធមកពីស្ថាប័នណាផងបាទសូមអរគុណ
ជំរាបសួរខ្ញុំធ្វើចន្ទួនមកពីរាជបណ្ឌិតស្ពាយកម្ពុជាសូមសួរទៅវាគ្មិនមកពីខាងម៉ាឡេស៊ីសួរថាតើធនាគារគូខ្មែរយើងអាចបែងចែកជាពិភពលោកខាងលិចលោកខាងកើតដែរទេព្រោះថាអាស៊ានយើងមានប្លុកអាស៊ានកុម្មុយនីសនិងប្លុកអាស៊ានសេរីហើយតែនឹងធម្មតាទាំង academic ទាំង researcher យើង base ទៅលើ government យើងសំអាងទៅលើរដ្ឋាភិបាលបើសិនបើរដ្ឋាភិបាលអត់ឲ្យខាង academy និយាយដោយសេរីភាពពេញលេញឲ្យព័ត៌មានសេរីភាពពេញលេញនឹងហើយតែជាគំនាបមួយអញ្ចឹងហើយសំណួរខ្ញុំសួរទៅខាងពីខ្មឹងខាងម៉ាឡេស៊ីថាតើធនាគារគូក្បាលនឹងអាចបែងចែកលោកខាងលិចនិងខាងកើតបានដែរទេនៅក្នុងក្របខ័ណ្ឌអាស៊ានបាទសូមអរគុណ
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your question. Perhaps if I may suggest you answer your question together with the previous question together. Well, so far I don't think that there has been any single solution to all the problems confronting us, particularly think tanks from the different countries with diverse political system. Even within ASEAN itself, I must say that it has never been homogeneous. So, coming back to your question, now, whether should we or should we not divide our kind of think tanks into the Western model and the Oriental model? My answer is negative. We shouldn't have that kind of notion to imitate a particular model, but rather we should be more prudent, more pragmatic, in evolving our own model in accordance with the societal needs at particular stage of development. Because we must acknowledge the fact that ASEAN countries, including Cambodia or even Malaysia, we might be now on the different levels of development, but we need to live with it. We shouldn't be too ambitious to imitate or to copy wholesale a particular model, particularly from the established democracies or from the West. And let us not be bogged down by the ideological disparity, even in this part of the world. What suits the people's needs, that should be considered as the best model for the country at that material time. But it is not going to be eternal. It's not going to last forever. Perhaps it may last for 5 to 10 years. But after that, we need to relook at it again. And coming back to the first question raised, I'm quite fascinated by your observation. And my little advice is we need to be more well-read. Whenever we come to the geopolitical narrative, we should read narrative from the West as well as narrative from the opposing camps or from this part of the world. There's nothing wrong with it, but that would make us to have a more balanced view rather than we accept wholesale under the bombardment of narrative, particularly from the West. I have nothing prejudicial against the West, but so far I've been observing that a lot of preaching has been done in this part of the world. Some are acceptable, some are tenable, some are not. And we need to be more careful and more discerning in choosing our model. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. យើងនៅសល់ពេលបែរជា4នាទីទៀតអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំសូមអនុញ្ញាតផ្ដល់ជូនមួយសំណួរទៀតបាទសូមគ្រប់ជើងប្រសិនមកមានបាទតែមួយសំណួរចុងក្រោយបាទជាសំណួរសំខាន់បាទសូមអញ្ជើញបាទ
Hello, thank you. ខ្ញុំឈ្មោះវងមេងមកពីរាជវិទ្យាកម្ពុជា I'm Wong Meng from Royal Academy of Cambodia. I have a question regarding our speaker in terms of independent. Our speaker also mentioned in terms of think tanks should be independent and the quality of the research. So, what is your perspective in terms of independent from think tanker from Western and from Asian perspective? Like Lee Kuan Yew also, provide, let's say, ASEAN worldview is a kind of independent from ASEAN or independently worldview from Western. What are the difference between independently research or think tank that they are doing?
បាទដោយសារតែលោកមិនបានសួរតទៅលើវាមានគ្មិនមួយណាអញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំសូមគោរពអនុញ្ញាតវាគ្មិនទាំង5រូបជួយចែកម្លែកបទពិសោធន៍និងអ្វីៗដែលលោកគ្មិនបានជួបផ្ទះនិងដោះស្រាយនៅបញ្ហាសូមគុំជើងបាទសូមថាសូមលោកនឹងឈុតបន្ថយមុនគេបាទ
បាទសូមថ្លែងអរគុណចំពោះសំណួរដ៏មានសារៈសំខាន់នេះមែនទែន think tank ទោះមកពីប្រទេសតែប្រកាន់យកនយោបាយកុម្មុយនីសក៏ដោយមកពីប្រជាធិបតេយ្យសេរីក៏ដោយមកពីតំបន់អាស៊ានឬតំបន់ណាក៏ដោយ think tank ត្រូវមានជំហរជា think tank ហ្នឹងហើយដែលយើងចង់ថាឲ្យមានឯករាជ្យភាពនិងមានស្វ័យភាពធ្វើអ្វីមួយទាំងការស្រាវជ្រាវក្តីការផ្ដល់យោបល់ក្តីការតស៊ូមតិក្តីការផ្ដល់ដំណោះស្រាយផ្សេងៗក្តីគឺក្នុងជំហរដែលដោះស្រាយបញ្ហាសកលបញ្ហារូបមិនមែនជាជំហរមួយដែលយើងទៅមកខាងណាមួយដោយសារតែនិន្នាការនយោបាយឬក៏ដោយសារតែហេតុថាសម្ពាធឬក៏សំណូមពររបស់ម្ចាស់ជំនួយដោយដរ Smoking ក៏និយាយយ៉ាងដល់ល្មមគេឲ្យលុយរដ្ឋាភិបាលឲ្យលុយប៉ុន្តែគេមិនបានបង្គាប់បញ្ជាដាក់សម្ពាធឲ្យអ្នកឯងធ្វើអីទេអ្នកឯងធ្វើអីធ្វើតែក្នុងជំហរមួយគឺរកឲ្យឃើញនៅការពិតរកឃើញនៅសច្ចភាពអញ្ចឹងសម្រាប់ខ្ញុំខ្ញុំយល់ថា
think tank មិនគួរគិតថាខ្លួនធ្វើសម្រាប់តែតំបន់របស់ខ្លួនឬក៏ប្រទេសរបស់ខ្លួនទេគឺធ្វើសម្រាប់បញ្ហាតំបន់ទាំងមូលឬក៏ពិភពលោកទាំងមូលអាស្រ័យទៅលើបញ្ហាដែលយើងកំពុងជជែកកំពុងដោះស្រាយបាទខ្ញុំសូមប៉ុណ្ណឹងសូមអរគុណ
Dr. Bradley, please.
The question calls to mind a debate, possibly one of the most well-known debates in social science 25 years ago between Lee Kuan Yew and the great economist Amartya Sen, where Lee Kuan Yew argued for the Asian values idea that Asian societies were fundamentally distinct. And Amartya Sen in Development is Freedom returns with the idea that these concepts, etc., are in fact universal, that they can't be claimed by the West. Because the heritage of the West, if we look to Aristotle for the idea of freedom, for example, well, Aristotle believed in slavery. So not exactly the 20th century or 21st conceptualization of freedom. I'd shamelessly lean very strongly on Amartya Sen's idea, that oftentimes we can overly reify a division that is not as strong or is simply constructive. And I fall back as a social scientist and a very devout empiricist on rigor, method, and data. For me, the idea of independence is simply looking at the question, looking how I'm able to answer it, how I can answer it validly with a strong level of reliability. And my independence is and my idea of anyone working in of being independent is being loyal to those values of validity, replicability, and honesty with data. And I think that those are ideals that all of us, from whatever background, whatever nation, can come around and support. And I do hope that that's the direction that we take as a think tank community globally moving forward. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. On ticket, please. Yeah, okay. Dr. No? But thank you so much for the questions. I think we talked two different things. One is the financial independence. Another thing is the academic independence. It's quite hard to find any think tank to be financially independent unless they can afford to run and operate that think tank by themselves from their own money, doing this or that, a group of people. But it's quite hard, And then the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, I think Dr. Smoking have presented earlier. There is some political affiliation, but in terms of academic thinking, in terms of academic research and policy analysis, we maintain that degree of freedom and liberty in in the sphere of to what extent a think tank can decide their own research topic and discussion and present that data, that analysis back to whether it is to the sponsor or whether to the people in the general public. So two different concepts we have to discuss here. Maybe it is best to think about how to promote the academic freedom and also the academic intellectual independence in the policy studies and analysis. Giving the second more freedom, more space, more liberty, and more choices, to manage and govern themselves, by the think tank. And then with the acceptance by the public, by the government, by private sector of their ideas and opinions, by those think tankers, would be very conducive, for think tank to grow and prosper and to be able to add value in that way, in that line. And for financial freedom and independence, I cannot think of any better way than what we have seen so far. That think tanks are sometimes, financed by individual group of think tankers themselves, who donate their time, no, who contribute their time and energy, and then pooling their talents and energy and forming that group, and then at the end of the day, they provide back to the society in terms of intellectual thinking and thought, all of those. And like my think tank, there have been a lot of questions with regard to who fund my think tank. We get nothing, $0 from the government. When we meet with the Chinese, they ask us, do you get some funding from the Japanese? Because the board, not board of director, one of the members of in our board is a honorary advisor is Japanese. And when we met the Japanese, some kind of question, some kind of suspicion, do you get some funding from Chinese? When we meet from people in the West, including those my former colleagues from other country, from Western world, they ask, do you get money from China? These kind of things are always is the unsettled questions for us. But we openly explain it to them that we get nothing from them except project funding. We got the funding from EU to do a research on a free trade agreement feasibility study supporting the Cambodian government, and as well as the EU themselves. They would like to see the impacts. So as a think tank, well, we do not just engage in debates. We engage in data collection and data analysis. We sometimes get the funding from private sector to do a survey on, for example, energy consumption in Cambodia. And then we share back to the company, the firm that fund us for that survey, and also the result of that finding is published and then can be accessed on it widely, publicly by anyone. And in this way, I say that it comes back to our plenary sessions, whether to what extent we add value and we can contribute to addressing some of the challenges of our time. But we need the opportunity to engage like this one. Private sector, civil society organization, government, if you believe that you would like us to contribute to those policy discussions and also policy analysis, continue to fund us, because we cannot fund ourselves. We cannot fund ourselves, from my pocket all the time. But please fund us for those research, and then we make ourselves useful and valuable in this regard. Thank you.
Just Doctor, we have 2 minutes more. You can please. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Just very quickly. Well, just now I did mention about the word independence. Independence in terms of financially, right? Of course, just now Dr. Kim Long did mention about that. I'm not going to recycle that again. But more importantly, I must say that this is a relative term when we talk about independence. Relative term, relatively independent. We know very well that so long as the think tanks or the NGOs, you couldn't be independent financially, then you are always attached to your paymasters. You need to remain subservient to your paymasters, even though certain quarters may argue that the grants are dished out without any conditionalities. But again, we have seen that in the past or even until today, most of the think tanks in Southeast Asia, we are in dire need of funds. We are not financially independent. We need funds. And that gives the opportunities for some international bodies, or at least some of the entities cloaked in the outfit of international bodies, right? They come in with the funds. But again, we need to be extra careful. Because as I said earlier, sometimes, not all the times, sometimes this might turn out to be a Trojan horse. Remember the story of Trojan horse. That means to say, with the attached conditionalities, and at the same time, you are serving the geopolitical interests of the paymasters unknowingly. or sometimes semi-knowingly. And last but not least, if I may drive home one point on independence, that is the independent-mindedness. That is what I have been talking about in my own country. Independent-mindedness simply means that whenever we are on the receiving end of all the narrative today, especially narrative on geopolitics, we need to read between the lines. We have been under constant onslaught of different kinds of preaching, and we need to be more discerning. We need to distinguish which are tenable and which are not. And also at the same time, we need to watch the moves of the preachers. We must see and be discerning over whether or not the preachers are doing what they preach, rather than we just accept wholesale. This is what I try to share with all of you here. Thank you.
បាទសូមអរគុណវាគ្មិនទាំង5រូបនិងអង្គវិធីទាំងមូលដោយសារតែពេលវេលាយើងចប់ហើយអស់អញ្ចឹងខ្ញុំសូមបិទកិច្ចពិភាក្សាពេលទី1នៅពេលនេះបាទហើយនឹងសូមជូនពរអង្គវិធីទាំងមូលនៅពុទ្ធពរទាំង4ប្រការនៃរូបអនាសុខៈពលៈដើម្បីគិតណាសូមអរគុណបិទកម្មវិធីបាទ